Hi, I'm Alan Cheswick. Welcome to my Systems Cannabis course. In this preview, we are going to explore cannabis in a network and systems context, which is vital to fully appreciate the way that cannabinoids work in our body as a secondary system. I really hope you enjoy your learning experience and look forward to hearing back from you. Hello. This course is different from other cannabis courses you may have seen or have taken. The primary focus is to present information within a network systems context. This is going to allow you to have a deeper understanding of complex nature, that is biology. You will also be confident with your knowledge, all the way from the molecule to the macro impacts it has on a living organism. We will also visit limits of science, including some common logical fallacies. These common logical fallacies lead to fundamental misinterpretations of information and facts. This sets back cannabis knowledge for everyone. Finally, we will be viewing the future of cannabis research. There are several focuses of this course. For each focus, there are a few different units, between 2 and 3. So our first focus, for example, would be planting the seeds for cannabis knowledge. This is introduction to the basics of life, chemistry, physics, and shapes of molecules. Biology. We all know it. It's the study of life. And it's going to help us appreciate cannabis. We're also going to have to understand some basic science. Biology is not physics. It is far less predictable because the information is very contextual. No two humans are the same. Can you point to somebody in the room and say they are average? So how to think about life? Well, not to bust your bubble, but a very simplistic view of life is that you're a walking pile of chemical reactions. And the tree is a stationary pile of chemical reactions. These chemical reactions are required for task completion. And all the chemical reactions is referred to as the metabolism. So something you might hear is you have to wake up in the morning and start your metabolism by eating breakfast. Turns out that's false. Your metabolism is always going, unless you're dead, and in fact, you burn more calories by staying in that fasting state for 2 to 3 hours. So if you want to lose some weight, wait 2 to 3 hours before you eat your first meal. So let's talk about metabolism here for a moment. Your metabolism, aka those tasks you need to complete, are responding to the environment, growing and maturing, reproducing, if you're lucky, and as a species, evolving over time to changing conditions in the environment. So these tasks, aka chemical reactions, are extremely complex. And we living creatures navigate these biological tasks by using chemical machines, enzymes, proteins. These are all designed by nature through the process of evolution. Up next, we're going to preview the shape and function of molecules. Different molecules have different shapes. Throughout this course, you will be looking at different diagrams of molecules. Here you can see 2 different ways to show glucose. On the right is a space-filling model, and on the left is a chemical diagram. They're both showing the same information, just slightly differently. Now this shape influences the function and chemistry of a molecule. And lactose intolerance is an excellent example. It shows us how small changes in shape have drastic impacts on the biochemistry of a molecule and then the function of an organism. Here you can see how an enzyme works. This enzyme takes sucrose molecules and breaks them apart. Now, how does it recognize what molecule to bind? It does so by shape. Here are 3 different sugars: maltose, lactose, and sucrose. As you can see, lactose is much differently shaped than sucrose, only because of its position of the atoms themselves within the molecule. But this change prevents the enzyme from breaking down lactose. And then we all know what happens to lactose intolerance at that point: biomolecules and metabolism. So we know proteins are these enzymes, and they perform the vast majority of metabolic activity. In fact, most of these enzymes are so specific they only have one task. And again, they are designed by evolution. This design is written out within your DNA. Focus 2, adding more buds to your cannabis foundation. So let's take our knowledge of shape and molecules and apply it to cannabinoids. Over here, to the right, you can see delta-9 THC, the common psychoactive ingredient in marijuana, and some other endocannabinoids. These are cannabinoids that your body produces themselves. If you're looking at these 2 molecules, the top being delta-9 and the bottom being 2-AG, you can start to see some of the similarities in the shape. For example, they both have a polar group. And they also both have this chain. Because of these shape similarities, they both bond to the receptor. And so you can modulate activity. Cannabinoids are mainly used as signaling molecules. They are essentially objects of information. They send signals to cells via these molecular pathways. As you can see in the diagram, this is kind of complicated. It seems like it's turning some things on, it's moving to other molecules. And these processes can influence cell fate. This control or influence is the emergent properties that we get from cannabinoid consumption. So ratios of THC, CBD, CBN in cannabis signals us to experience or feel X, Y, and Z. The third focus in the course is on the endocannabinoid system. Nearly all species, from worms to plants, have the 3 basic aspects of the endocannabinoid system: the cannabinoids themselves, the signaling molecules, the receptors which bond to these cannabinoid molecules, and enzymes which make and degrade the cannabinoids, the receptors, and other parts of the endocannabinoid system. Why is the endocannabinoid system only a secondary messenger? Recall that worms, even bacteria, have some form of an endocannabinoid system. So in humans, it's considered a secondary system because of its function in our species. We have evolved other messaging systems as our primary means of cell communication. However, it is very clear that cannabis can have a medical impact on health. Secondary messenger systems can have a significant influence on the physiology and homeostasis of an individual. The purpose of a secondary messaging system is to communicate information within a context. So this leads to amplifying a primary signal, to make some sort of decision, to carry out some task. So this context of this message depends on many factors. What type of cell is it? Where is it located? What time of day is it? What genes are being expressed? How old is this cell? How old is the person? Systems are a set of working components that together form a mechanism. we can think about this mechanism as a network. Networks are groups within a system. So here, the parts being shown are the circles and their connections with the lines. This is a complex biological network, and this network allows us to see how different systems are interconnected. And then from these different interconnected systems, your body or the organism or your cells will make some sort of decision, some sort of measurable behavioral context. And so if we can understand what's going on in the network, we can also better understand the emergent property of all of these processes. So there are two main types of thinking. There's reductionism, which breaks down systems into parts to better understand the whole. And then there are systems thinking, which takes the parts with their context, compares that with other interacting networks to understand the whole system. Complete understanding requires both types of thought processes. And in certain instances, reductionism allows you to understand the system, and in certain instances, the system can be reduced. So let's look at some errors in reductionism and the need for context whenever you're talking about information. So here's an example that's commonly reported. THC in cannabis is bad. The claim is that cannabis causes harms to society. The evidence to support that claim would be that THC activates CB1 receptors, and that causes psychosis. The rationale would be that psychosis can be a public safety concern. Well, reducing cannabis to only THC is flawed because cannabis produces many types of cannabinoids, and so the thinking of reductionism is simply flawed and should not be used to make decisions. In fact, when we see that people use whole cannabis extracts, especially with higher levels of CBD, they do not have psychosis. And since most cannabis users most times do not use pure THC, the psychosis is completely overstated. I really like this example for demonstrating the need for context, or the need of context for information. So this context of information allows us to better predict the results of a system or network. Very important for understanding. It also helps you think better. In biology, the conditions of a system are set at a certain point, and this is called homeostasis. Now, people have different homeostatic set points. For example, my average temperature might be 98 degrees. Yours might be 98.6. However, everybody uses feedback to maintain their homeostatic level. So over here we've got the status of a system. We can talk about it in terms of disease symptoms. The intake of cannabis negatively impacts this. So your homeostatic level increases. You intake more cannabis, the state of your system goes even further to homeostasis and eventually passes it. Cannabis provided negative feedback to the disease or condition. You took cannabis, you felt better. That brought you closer to homeostasis. Here the system is the user, and the user provided negative feedback. They stopped using the cannabis. Since the desired result was obtained from the system, aka the person, will continue to use this treatment. And if the continued treatment works, then you have your positive feedback.
Hey, welcome back. This complete the preview of the Systems Cannabis course. I hope you learned something, and I look forward again to hearing your feedback.